How would you describe Sergeant Shriver?
Well, I would describe him as one of the most innovative and accomplished peace builders of the 20th century. And I would say that the key to his savvy in that regard was not just his political and institutional abilities, but the fact that he was really deeply aware of the flow of the spirit within himself. And he was able to recognize that flow in other people and build it into the institutions that he created. Peace Corps, one of them.
Yeah. What did President Kennedy ask him to do?
The day after President Kennedy was inaugurated, he called Sarge and asked him to head up a task force to create the Peace Corps. And Sarge told me that he wasn't really interested in doing that, and he was going to tell the president no when he picked up the call. But in the end, he felt that he was spiritually called to do that work, and so he said yes. And my book tracks the reality of what he was doing when he was when he was answering President Kennedy, and what he meant when he said he was spiritually called to do that.
How moving was it for you to talk with this man?
Oh, it was extremely moving. I mean, he was an extraordinary man, and I was lucky enough to know him for the last 20 years of his life. I had many conversations with him. I mean, everybody who worked with Sarge loved Sarge, and so it was a pleasure. He was always creative. He was always interested. He was always full of energy. He was loving and firm and brilliant.
What was President Kennedy's vision of the Peace Corps?
I think President Kennedy's vision of the Peace Corps came from Sarge, actually, and the result and his efforts over a very intense period of time to design the Peace Corps. I think what President Kennedy wanted and what he wanted Sarge to fulfill for him was an opportunity for Americans to volunteer in helping make friends and build peace across the world at a time that was torn between the two major power blocks, the Soviet Union and the United States. He
I was
didn't think about how to do that. He left it to Sarge to figure that out.
I was going to ask you about the times. So we're talking the 1960s. What did this mean to have America launch the Peace Corps?
Well, I think it meant a whole lot, obviously, because well, maybe it isn't obvious, but it meant a whole lot because the there was a Gallup poll taken before the Peace Corps was even created, and 70% of Americans said they were in favor of it. Sarge famously would say that more people wrote to him asking for jobs and to volunteer for the Peace Corps than they did all the other positions in government at the time. And the reason they were writing to him was because he was head of the transition. He helped President Kennedy staff the government.
Talk about the times, the 1960s. What did it mean to have the Peace Corps?
The Peace Corps, the world in the 60s was polarized like it is now, but differently. And so the question was, how are you going to break through the polarization in such a way that doesn't deepen it or doesn't devolve into a we won and you lost kind of thing. And so what Peace Corps meant was it sparked the imagination of Americans to say that we can, because we want peace, open ourselves to the peoples in the developing world, to learn their language, to learn what their issues were, to anchor themselves in their culture, and on that basis to ask what they could do to help. And that kind of approach to making friends and not demanding American sovereignty, not sovereignty, but demanding American. I'm sorry. Let me just say that again.
Yeah. I think that you're saying that it was about peace and not what?
Not power. It was about friendship and not dictating people, it was about learning in their own terms who people were and what they wanted and what they needed, and providing that to them in their own way rather than deciding in advance what they ought to have and deciding in advance what they ought to have because it best suited us. So
So,
it was an inspirational thing, and for Sarge, it tacked onto the compassion that everybody intrinsically has and the compassion that the Spirit is calling us all to fulfill.
so we have a Peace Corps today. What was the difference back then?
There's still a lot of similarities. I think the difference back then, though, was that it was seen as a very serious effort at projecting what it means to be American in the world. That it was that driven by Sarge, it was an exercise in what he called practical idealism, and it was taken seriously as something that could actually change the world. That has, and that was true for a number of years, for the first 4 or 5 years. That is now isn't quite so prominent. And it was also addressing an important need at the time. It was the time of decolonialization, and nations in Africa and around the world were becoming independent for the first time, and there was a need for people to step up and fill positions and work, and that is probably less needed now in that way. There are other needs.
Well, you mentioned Africa. So my stepfather was in Tanzania, Africa. What did it mean to go to a country like that?
Well, I think for the individual like your stepfather, it meant having an opportunity to really make a difference in the world, to make a difference to bring what your stepfather and all Peace Corps volunteers think of are as the true values of what it means to be American in the world. It meant the opportunity to bring that there. I think for the country, it meant providing an alternative to a foreign policy which understandably is oriented toward the self-interest of the United States. And this is a program that enabled people to be interested in the needs of those who were less countries that were less fortunate and less developed than ours. And that was inspiring. That was powerful.
So I found a stack of letters that my father had written when he was in Tanzania. I can't imagine what it's like. What's that?
Oh, I just wondered if they reflect what I'm talking about. I bet they were.
They're a little bit more simple. You know, we're trying to get the boys through this grade. The test is coming up. It's a lot of work. For someone to be a teacher in Tanzania in the 1960s, what might that have been like?
I can only imagine. Certainly, education was one of the major things that Peace Corps did in those days. And the thing that's always staggered me about it was, if you think about what it must be like in terms of trust and in terms of the trust you had to earn to go to another country and to teach the host country nationals' children how to read, how to do math, how to think about politics, how to think about history. It takes a whole lot of trust, and so the teachers, like your stepfather, had to be really affirmed in the community, and they had to walk in the community in a way that led them to be believable and credible and welcomed. It's hard to be hard to imagine the United States doing something in reverse, inviting teachers from Tanzania to come in and work our schools.
Wow, that's a powerful thought. All right, so then my mother was in healthcare in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
We have a
Thoughts on
fascinating family.
Yeah. So as I was saying, I'm going to restate that for myself. So my mother was in the Peace Corps in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with an all women's team. Thoughts on that?
Sarge was amazing and ahead of his time in that regard. The fact that he would put together all women's team, he was so sure that he built the Peace Corps on an effective model of personal and social and political change, that it didn't really matter whether you were male or female. It didn't matter if you were Christian or Muslim or Jewish or some form of agnostic and atheist. He took Jewish people and put them in Arabic countries, and Christians and Buddhists in Christian countries, and women in male-dominated situations, because he felt that the method of paying attention to other people, learning their language, getting to know them in their own terms, could break through barriers of gender and race and politics and culture. And the Peace Corps has demonstrated that over the last 50 years, 60 years now.
When I talk to Peace Corps volunteers from the 60s, I think of the calling from President Kennedy: ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. What does it say about people who stepped up to volunteer for the Peace Corps in the early days?
Well, it says that they heard that call and it resonated with them. And I think you're absolutely right. I think Sarge, there was a special spirit at the time, and Sarge and President Kennedy were leaders in doing that. And obviously your mother and your stepfather were people who responded to that call, who went beyond their own personal comfort, who went beyond their own personal comfort levels to do something larger for the world and for people they served. It was amazing, really. And that's what Sarge thought the spirit was doing. And if you don't mind my saying so, it's that model that I discuss in my book, The Call.
So
the Spiritual Realism of Sargent Shriver.
You've written 2 books. Why did you want to write these books?
I think Sarge is a special leader, innovative and accomplished. And I think that he was able 50 years ago now, 60 years ago now, to imagine ways of putting programs together that we have trouble thinking about. And so his models, I think, would be very helpful for these polarized times. So the first book I wrote was about how he was able to spiritualize politics without politicizing religion. And this last one is on his spiritual realism and how other people can understand what that is and practice it in their own leadership.
Because religion-wise, we know him as a Catholic. Is that right?
Yes, he was a Catholic. He was a Catholic.
So
a very devout Catholic, and also a universal Catholic. So not a sectarian one. He was always insisting on that.
Okay. And that means what?
That means he wasn't doctrinaire about he believed that for himself, the Catholic Church was the organization, was the church that had nurtured him, was the church that had put him in touch with the Spirit, which was the church. I mean, he went to Mass every day, and he prayed to Mary, and he prayed to Doubting Thomas, and he invoked the saints, and worked with and prayed his rosary every day. So he was very devout. At the same time, he was open-minded and broad, and did not have any question that the Spirit was also operative in other peoples and other traditions. So there's opportunity for friendship and conversation there.
Right. So living in Los Angeles, of course, we think of our former California First Lady, Maria Shriver, as being one of his children. How do you see his legacy playing out through his children in their own way?
His children are wonderfully accomplished people. They have done their own special things. I mean, Tim Shriver runs Special Olympics International. Bobby Shriver has been in politics in LA and has worked with veterans and is a major thinker in those kinds of fields. Maria was the first lady. They're all dedicated to. Mark worked with Save the Children, is now running a school. Anthony works with Best Buddies. So all of them have incredible legacies of their own, no doubt inspired by their parents. But they too have created major programs that enable people to serve and to bring people together and help transcend barriers.
So as I'm thinking of Father's Day and going through my own father's notes, having been in the Peace Corps, I wanted to ask you to give me a thought on the lasting legacy of this father of the Peace Corps.
I think the lasting legacy of Sarge, the lasting legacy of Sarge as father of the Peace Corps is the notion that if we make friends, we can build peace, and that the goal there is to. Sorry, I'm being distracted by
It happens.
my father-in-law coming in with dinner.
That happens. Usually it's me with the Zoom and the dogs in the background. I totally get that. But yeah, so as Father's Day, we think of the father of the Peace Corps and where his legacy is today.
He was on the cover of Time magazine twice during the 60s. He was he ran for president. He was the Democratic Party's vice presidential candidate in 72. He was a major public figure. So his legacy lives on in ways that, powerful ways that people don't really recognize in all the programs that he created. I think his specific name and memory, though, has faded from popular imagination, and part of the reason for writing the books is to help to bring it back. And probably, but at the same time, he didn't so much care for notoriety himself. He was much more interested in helping others, and I'm sure is very happy with the work that his children are doing in his name and in his legacy, and the fact that the programs he started, the programs in the war on poverty, like Head Start and Legal Services for the Poor and many others, continue to work and continue to influence people in positive ways.
I just have two more questions. With the assassination of President Kennedy and then Bobby Kennedy as well, how did that affect his passion for the mission?
That's a very good question. Sarge was shattered by those events, and it didn't alter his passion for the mission or his belief in people or his belief in the importance of compassion and friendship and building peace, because he wasn't grounded in his own self. He was grounded in a larger flow of spirit and love, and that helped him to transcend those major losses. And Jackie Kennedy trusted Sarge enough that she asked him to arrange President Kennedy's funeral. So I mean, despite his own personal loss in that situation, he was still asked to step up and to serve and to create a ceremony for the people of the United States that would help to heal their own wounds of that experience.
Yeah, my mother was in the Peace Corps in Brazil when the assassination of President Kennedy happened, and one of her colleagues was reminding me of how people in Brazil came to tell them about this news, and everybody was hugging them as if they were a family member and giving condolences. Yeah.
And Peace Corps volunteers at the time were called Children of Kennedy, or Children of Sarge. More dogs and more Peace Corps volunteers had a lot of dogs. More were named Sarge than anything else. So there was a strong, affinity and caring.
I love that. Well, let me ask you a final question. Are you a changed, better, different person having spent so much time with Sargent Shriver?
All those things. I'm certainly a better person for it. I'm no doubt changed by it. I mean, it was a real privilege to be able to get to know Sarge, but also to have the opportunity and to have it be my job that was my task to figure out how he did what he did, what his method was, how he how he could take his own very profound faith and create programs that were not doctrinaire but quite the contrary, brought people together to build peace and to make friends. And so I don't know how it could be any better for me in having had that opportunity.
Where do we find your info?
You can find my info at sargentshriver.org, which is the website for the Sargent Shriver Peace Institute. And you can find my info. You can find my thoughts and Sarge's thoughts if you were to read the call, which
That's
is
the book.
That's the book. Yep.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed our time together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.